gather round, gather round. Here it is, a little after 9. I don't know whether it's a little after 9 or not. It's 9, precisely. Okay, well, I was joking just a little bit ago that the more I talk about the subject we've been talking about, the more other stuff that keeps flowing in, so that the stack of stuff I haven't gotten to yet keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. But it only comes once a Sunday, so we're going to nibble at it a little bit again. What we're going to be talking about is the Christian in society and how our faith needs to be or shouldn't be reflected in how we understand public policy, how we understand how we vote, how we understand, well, to use a phrase which is fraught with all kinds of feelings, culture wars, okay? Culture wars. I'm going to say, regarding culture wars, and what we mean by culture wars is the kinds of things that are happening in the public sphere in which we seem to have a couple of sides that are doing battle with one another. And the church has to wrestle with, do we get involved in culture wars? And I'm going to tell you a reason that we should be involved and a reason we shouldn't be involved, okay? The reason we should be involved is the opposite of what you're normally told. You're normally told that you shouldn't be involved because churches shouldn't be involved in such things, and I'm going to say that's nonsense for the reasons we talked about last week. You can separate church and state, and for a variety of reasons, it's a good idea to separate church and state, not absolutely and completely and always, but as a general rule, keep them separate. But I think that if you haven't already picked up, you are going to get it eventually, that you cannot separate politics and religion or public policy and religion. That's not possible. It's not just it's not a good idea, it's not possible. So we're going to talk more about that. So when people tell you that you as a Christian shouldn't bring your faith into the voting booth or into arguments about what the law should be, and I don't just mean the law, that formal law. I mean what we should embrace or what we should resist in society, even if there's no law about it. It's just, what do we say is okay, what do we say is not? When people say you shouldn't bring your religion into that, that is not the reason to stay out of it. In fact, the fact that all of these are religiously profound issues means you have to. As a Christian living in this society, you have to. Now, that's not an order, that's not a command. Actually, what I'm telling you is you don't have any choice. If you decide not to do anything, you've made a choice, okay? So you are going to be involved in this, and you are going to bring your religion to bear. It may not be the religion you actually believe, but you will, because there's no way around this, okay? So that's the reason why we should. We are Christians living in the world, and you simply cannot set what you believe aside. If you do, then you don't believe it. I'll just tell you that straight up. You just don't believe it. Now, or you believe in a lie. Somebody's telling you you can't do this. Here's the reason why we shouldn't be involved, okay? And there is a reason why we shouldn't be involved, and that is it's not the church's mission. Now, when I say that, I'm not really saying we shouldn't be involved. I'm saying the church, as an institution, should not take up its job to fix society or to fix the ails of society. Our job is to preach the gospel. Our job is to bring the kingdom of God. That's the church's job. That's why we're here. So the church as an institution is something founded by Jesus and sent into the world. We are given a mission, and the mission is not help the world live a better life, help them not to make bad decisions. That's not the job of the church. So that's a reason why we need to be very careful how churches get involved in this. But there's a distinction here that I'm making between churches as institutions and individual Christians who live in the world. Now, the church is in the world too, but it has a mission. So we don't want to become distracted by trying to teach people how to live better lives and how culture would be better if we followed the 10 Commandments, let's say. That is not the church's mission. However, for individual Christians, we live here, and that's part of what we do as individuals. It's not strictly speaking preaching the gospel, okay, which is our obligation as individual Christians too. All right, hold on. Against the advent of somebody calling and then this thing really making noise, I'm going to turn this off right now while I'm thinking about it. All right. Now, An awful lot of what passes for culture wars is often described in terms of just an argument over rules. Okay, now I have up here, I've titled it Public Morality. You could call it lots of different things, but our shared experience with one another. And I have at the top, there's a little pyramid there. At the top I have rules, okay? These are the particular laws or regulations, or they are the written or unwritten rules, the things that will get us in trouble with our neighbors, or the things that will get us a pat on the back with our neighbors. The rules, the etiquette, the ethics, the things that we ought to do and ought not to do. Okay? There are rules, and an awful lot of the time, these controversies that we have are phrased as though they're just arguments over rules. You have your rules, I have my rules. Why should you be imposing your rules? It's just a different rule, and I like this rule better, and so that's it. Sometimes things that we argue about are just rules. Sometimes they are. Once upon a time, for example, the speed limit in the United States was lowered universally to 55 miles per hour, okay? And then later on, when the reasons for that evaporated, eventually people said, wait a minute, I'd like to go faster than 55 miles per hour. I'd like to go 65. Then some said 70, some say 75, and some said the sky is the limit, okay? All right. That would be an example of an argument over a rule. What should the speed limit be? But what I'm saying is it's really an argument over a rule alone. Now, on the other hand, here is another rule. Once upon a time, it was considered bad for people of the opposite gender to cohabitate, to live together without benefit of marriage, unless it's like a brother, sister, mother, something like that. I mean, you just didn't do it. And there were actually laws on the books about this, but nobody cared about that, because what really enforced this was social custom. If you did that, your neighbors thought you were creepy and wrong and bad, and so you just didn't do that. Decent people didn't do that. If you're going to have illicit sexual relations, have the decency to hide it at least. I mean, that was, and society really was serious about this. So, people who just lived with other people typically were marginalized, and they were already marginalized before they did it. Even if there was a law, very few people were ever prosecuted for such a thing like that. But society kept vigilance. That's a rule. A man and a woman who are not married cannot live together. If you try to get a hotel room together, you cannot do that. Even if you're just traveling across the country, you have no romantic interest in one another, you're just trying to save money. The answer is no. It looks bad, and you shouldn't do it. That is a rule. And then along come some that say we should be able to do that. I have a right to do that. So we have an argument over the rules. Should that be allowed or should it not be allowed? That is an argument over a rule, but unlike the speed limit thing, it is not an argument only about a rule. There's something much, much more going on there. Now what I have up here is rules, rights/duties, religion, reality. So let's do a little bit of moral reasoning here and just kind of think about how all this works out. We can talk about our country, or we can just talk about a group of people who have to live together, okay? Rules are the simplest things, but rules are meant to define what is underneath them. And what is underneath them we'll call rights and duties. Rights and duties. When people live with one another, we have rights and duties with respect to one another. Okay? Now when I say rights and duties, I don't want you to think narrowly in terms of rights being my freedoms to do this or that or the other thing. There are such things as rights when we say I have the freedom to do this or that, but most rights really, that's not the best way to couch them. And that's to misunderstand half the equation when we talk about my right to do something or my right to be free from something, okay? We live in a culture as human beings filled with duties. What do I mean by duty? I mean obligations. I mean obligations to one another. I talked to a fellow once, and he was resentful that God should make various commands on him. He wasn't a believer. But he was resentful that God should make, because he said, I didn't ask to be born. Okay? Now, actually, if you think about that, maybe that's important. We could say, I don't care whether it's right or not. God is God, and if he says you'll do this, you'll do this. That's not a good response, although it's true, because it kind of assumes something. It assumes that, yeah, it's unfair that you didn't ask to be born, and yet here you are and have all these obligations. That's unfair, but God is God, and he didn't have to be fair to you. That's not the best answer. Rather, we should back up and say, well, wait a minute. Since when does your duty to others come about only because you agree to it? How many of the duties that we have in life did you agree to? Do you have, or did you have, growing up, did you have a duty to your parents? Did you ask that they be your parents? Why did you have a duty to your parents? Because they're your parents. Okay? Did they have a duty to you? Did they ask for you? Well, they asked for a child, but not you. Okay, they had a better child in mind than you and me. All right, so that's what you have. Okay, so in our earliest experiences, we realize that we have duties that we didn't ask for. Do you have a duty to obey laws? Well, wait a minute. Did you ask for that duty? Did you agree to accept that duty?
Did I sign that social contract?
Did you say, I am free to do anything, but in order to protect my property and my freedoms, I will cede some of this back to you all, and I will undertake the duties that I have with respect to you? Nonsense. Did you ask to be born in America? Did you ask to be born under this set of laws? Did you agree to any of this? Does anybody care whether you did or not? The answer is no. Jesus says to you and me that we have a duty to love our neighbor as ourselves. Did you ask for that duty? You did not ask for that duty. Okay? It's your duty whether you like it or not. So let's begin with this. Although we Americans love to talk about freedom, freedom in an absolute sense does not exist. This doesn't even come close to existing. That's the first point. The second point is, even a limited freedom, in some sense, is never divorced from duty. Never divorced from duty. And I'll show you why in just a minute. Okay? And the fact of the matter is, each and every single one of us, and it doesn't matter if you're a Christian or not, okay, if we want to talk a lot about duties and liberties and all of that, we need to understand that constitutional liberties are very narrow things. Because the reality of human life is, our lives are filled with duty all over the place from the day we were born until the day we die. When you get up in the morning, every minute of your day, all the way till you go to bed at night, you have duties and responsibilities toward others. And if you breach those duties, you will pay a price. And sometimes a very heavy price. And nobody asks you whether you wanted them or not. They are just part and parcel of being alive. So the reality of being a living, breathing human being is you are not your own. You do not get to do what you want. And the starting point for all moral discussion is not your freedom.
Man is not sovereign. God is sovereign.
Well, and we're going to talk a lot more about that. But the thing is, you and I have obligations. They may be fair. They may not be fair. You may have asked for them. You may not have asked for them. You may keep them. You may pay a terrible price for not keeping them, and it doesn't matter. They are what they are, and you will accept those things, or you will be a profoundly marginalized individual. Well, your typical person who is totally addicted to drugs and has let their life go completely to seed will demonstrate to you what it's like when a person just refuses to keep their duties to anybody and just live for themselves. The slothful person will live in poverty because they have failed in very elemental things. And if you just refuse from now on to take a shower, brush your teeth, or comb your hair, you will find yourself in not very much longer from today not being very welcome in polite company, and much longer than that, and you won't be welcome in any company at all. Okay? So duties. Now, rights do not exist apart from duties. Okay? Because here's the thing. Rights and duties are two sides of an equation. If I have a right, you have a duty to respect my right. Okay? If you have a right, I have a duty to respect your right. If you have no obligations or duties to me, then I have no rights with respect to you. You can do with me whatever you want. If I have the right to say whatever I want, you have the duty to let me do it. Do you see that? Otherwise, if the government or everybody else in society says you do not have the right to say whatever you want, then I can assert the right if I like, but they won't respect it. So, my right and my duty. Okay, a husband and wife make promises to one another, the marriage vows. They have voluntarily accepted duties, right? Love, honor, and cherish till death do us part. So there are obligations and duties with respect to one another. There are also rights here. The wife has a right to count on her husband to do what? To do his duty, right? And the husband has a right to count on the wife to do her duty. So in other words, if I'm going to drive down the road, I have a duty to be careful so I don't run into you. You have a right to count on me to do my duty and be careful. I have a right to count on you to drive carefully. You have a duty to drive carefully. Okay? Otherwise, nobody's going to get on the road. So whenever we talk about rights, and it doesn't matter what it is, there's no such thing as a right without a corresponding duty somewhere. So you can't just grant freedoms to this person without obligating other people. Okay? This isn't an American thing. This is just life. This is moral reasoning, basic moral reasoning, where two or three are trying to figure out how to live together. It involves mutual rights and duties. It always does. So nobody ever has, well, the only way you can be just totally free is if you live on an island all by yourself and you simply won't interact with anybody else. This is to ignore, of course, whether you have any rights or duties with respect to God. Do we have any rights with respect to God? Only if He gives you one. Okay? And I'm happy to tell you that in your baptism He has given you a right to count on Him. You have a right to count on Him to be faithful to His promises. You have a right. Because God has a duty. He has a duty to you and me? Yes. Actually, He has a duty to Himself. He's made a promise. He's voluntarily sort of obligated Himself and made us promises. So we can count on that. Okay? But beyond that, God He demonstrates what He is, but we have unlimited duty to Him. So our lives are lives of duty. So when we talk about rules, rules are meant to sort of protect or embody underlying duties and obligations to one another. Okay? So laws that were meant to make divorce difficult were meant to protect the rights of a husband and wife to count on one another. See, that was the point. If you say to people, you can get divorced whenever you want for whatever reason you like, if you grant the right to one of the people to divorce and dissolve this relationship whenever they want, you have stolen the right from the other one to count. You see? You're just taking it. So in our society, if we say, well, your obligation to one another extends only as long as you want to continue the obligation. So in other words, I will be obligated, I have a duty to you as long as I want to have a duty to you. But if I don't want to have a duty to you anymore, then I don't have a duty to go on and be faithful to you any longer than I want to. What is that? That is no duty. That is an illusory duty. Can my spouse count on me if I say, I will stay with you as long as I'm happy? My spouse can't count on that. If I make that promise to her, she can't count on that. If she makes that promise to me, I have no rights with respect to her. She's here today and gone tomorrow. Okay? If the law says, we'll allow you to get married, but we're not going to make it easy for you to get divorced, what we're trying to do is to protect the rights and duties by enforcing duties, but protecting rights. if we change the law and we say, you know what, if the two of you just want to live together, which is another way of saying you can leave whenever you want. Okay? Don't take this garbage when people tell you we can be just as committed without marriage. That's a lie. It actually might be possible that you could dispense with a marriage ceremony. Okay? Because there's nothing in the Bible that actually says there must be a ceremony, it must look this way. However, the essence of marriage is this lifelong commitment, and that cannot be that I'm not going to make that commitment, but I'm just as committed. Okay? That doesn't compute, and it's a practical matter. Whenever, number one, if you meet somebody like that, 98% of the time they're the man who's saying that, not the woman, but it could be the woman. But if you explore it a little bit further, you see very clearly what it is. They just want to leave their options open. But I'm not going to take it. Well, if you're not going to take it, you don't need the option. Well, but is the whole point. Duty means there's no but. Okay? So, what are the rules, duties, and obligations that a speed limit is meant to sort of protect or embody? Yeah, it's just, we should be careful with one another because human life is important. And just because you want to drive 107 miles per hour doesn't mean we should let you. And things are safer if we have a speed limit, and the lower the speed limit, the better to a point. Okay? Now, on the other hand, what if the safest speed is 35 miles per hour? Are people going to put up with that? So there's a balancing argument here where we say, well, okay, yeah, but people want to be safe with one another, but on the other hand, we also want to get where we're going. And that's important to us. That is another important value. So the speed limit is sort of a balancing of these things, but it is a recognition that people want to get places, and that's important. And being able to drive places is important, and if 35 miles per hour is going to make it difficult to drive places where people want to go, but 110 miles per hour is just too much, we're going to pick a number. What's the right number? There's no right number, but it is right that there should be a number. Do we agree with that? Okay. So when we talk about the rights and duties with respect to an argument over the speed limit, we don't really have an argument over the rights and duties. We're just trying to pick the best number. And reasonable minds can disagree what the best number is, and everybody can shrug their shoulders and say, well, I don't know that there is a right number, but we do have to pick one. Okay? And try not to pick the wrong one, okay? If everybody thinks it's wrong, then we probably made a bad choice. Okay, so sometimes arguments are just over rules. There's no real disagreement about the balancing of rights and duties, and we just have, maybe we want to change the rule. 55 is just, you know, when we're trying to save gas, maybe, I don't know if I believe that, but maybe. Anyway, we're not trying to do that anymore. 65, 70 should be fine. Cars are safer now, and blah, 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 blah. Okay. Now, but this business about cohabiting is a different matter, isn't it? Because now when we're talking about a changing of the rule, we're not talking about the same rights and duties. We're talking about adjusting rights and duties, are we not? Each side, presumably, is saying, I want the freedom to leave. I want to be able to enjoy the benefits of being married without the obligations. Let's just be crass. That's what that is. I want the freedom to do that. I want to change in the rules. The rules say I can't do that because even if I don't get arrested, everybody will frown at me, and that's not right. So let's change the rules. Okay, well, if you change the rules, you can't just change the rules. Changing of the rules changes the balance of rights and duties. The reason why you want to change the rule is not the rule. It is you don't like the obligations, the duties, right? Tell me if you disagree with me, because this is pretty simple stuff. It gets more complicated. Okay. Well, are rights and duties whatever we want them to be? Is the right and the duty that underscore a speed limit, that right and duty, that I be careful with your life and you be careful with mine, and I'm going to rely upon you to do that, and you're going to rely upon me to do that, is that just plucked out of the sky? It's just something that or is there something deeper in that?
Religion of reality.
What is the deeper thing that
Respect
says,
for life.
yes, yeah. Is anybody going to lower the speed limit so we don't run over as many crickets on the road? No.
Some might.
Some might. We'll see why they might. But the thing is, there are things that we don't care about. Certain amount of moths are going to be smashed against our windshield. Okay, the faster we go, the more smashed they're going to be. So if we go slow enough, though, no moths will be harmed in the driving of this car. All right?
Gaia is happy.
But when it comes to human life, we don't say that. Because there is a deeper principle involved. When it comes to whether a man and a woman can just dissolve a sexual relationship anytime they like, enter into it and unenter into it, it's just a matter of their mutual consent. We are not just talking about an adjustment of regulations. It could be any which way. There is a principle underneath there, and the principle underneath there is saying something profound about obligations and duties which arise with sex, with children, and family. Okay? And society traditionally has had much to say about that. But listen, these underlying principles about sex, marriage, children, and family, the underlying principles about the value of human life with, over against the value of getting someplace fast, those have to do with what I'm calling here religion or reality. Remember last week what we talked about. People like to talk about religion as a set of rules devolving from some god or something, but religion is a much broader thing with that, and when you really want to get right down to it, what religion is our conception of reality, which may or may not involve a god, which may or may not involve a god who has said anything. But we all have a conception of reality. It can't be helped. This is not something that, well, some people are religious and they have a reality. Other people just live. No, nobody just lives. Dogs, fleas, they just live. Human beings do not just live. We think about what we're doing. We cannot help it. It's one of the wonderful things about being a human being. You cannot help it. Okay? So we all have our realities, and when we talk about religion, we are talking about reality. What is your reality? What is mine? So when we are having arguments over rules, sometimes it's just an argument over a rule. Sometimes it's just an argument over the balance of rights. So in other words, we may agree. For example, here's one. Should we allow women to work in the workforce? We're giving rights to women that they didn't used to have, or allow them to own property, okay? Now, so we're going to change some rules here. We're going to allow women to own property. It's not just going to be the property of her husband. She's going to have her own life and her own property, okay? They're very happy about that. Okay, does that require a different reality, or can we say, no, it doesn't require a different reality, but it does require a sort of a different understanding of the rights, respective rights and obligations between men and women. Do you agree with that? Mm-hmm. So we could have an argument over rights and responsibilities that really is all founded on the same underlying reality, but the difference in rights and duties will make for different rules. So we can have an argument over rules that mean nothing more than that. We can have an argument over rules that are really an adjustment of rights and duties, which is something more important. Or we can have an argument that goes all the way down to the basic realities. What do we understand is going on here in life? Okay? Any thoughts on that before we move on? I'm going to give you some very basic alternate reality paradigms. These are very basic, but it's good for you to think about these things. I got some up there. We could have some more. Each one of these could have a lot of subparts to them, but I'm going to explain them all generally to you so that you can kind of see partly what I'm talking about. The first one says theism. Theism. What do you think theism means? Now, there's a way that I'm going to be using theism. There may be a more technical thing, or it might be a little bit different, but I'm going to tell you what I'm understanding by theism, and you'll see what I'm talking about. What do you think theism means?
There is a God and He is involved in our lives.
Okay, so that's an important couple of points. Number one is a theist believes that there is a God. But I'm going to go further than that. A theist believes that there is a God and that the God is a personal God. Okay? It's not just a force. It is a personal God, and that this God is involved in the lives of the things that this God has created. So God is the creator and author of things, involved in things, and is a personal God. Okay? Christians are theists. Muslims are theists. Jews are theists. We may have arguments over what God said, what God did, but both of us agree, or all of us agree, that God is there, he is a force to be reckoned with, and he is a person to be reckoned with, and if he speaks, you better listen. Okay? That's theism. It's very broad, and just because two people are theists doesn't mean they get along at all. Okay? Some set of theists flew planes into towers that were inhabited by other theists, and that wasn't good. And we all went to war with one another. Okay, now here's another way to conceive of the universe. I've called it here pantheistic monism. Isn't that fancy? I'm going to give you some fancy words here. You can probably rake up at your next cocktail party. 25 cents a piece. Pantheistic. This is Eastern, mostly Eastern religions. Okay, pantheistic monism. Pantheism means that that God and things are really the same. That stuff, the stuff of creation is an emanation of God. You and I are emanations of God. Life may be a special emanation from God, but really everything comes from God and everything goes back to God. That's different than theism. In theism, there is a sharp divide between that which is God and that which God creates. And crossing that line is called idolatry. But in pantheism, there's no line to cross. Everything is part of God. You and I are part of God. We come from God. We're going to go back to God. But what you have to understand here is this is pantheism. That's pantheism. Monism means God is not personal. Okay? God is an it, not a he. It's sort of the unifying force or spirit or life force or whatever. Think George Harrison and all of his dabblings in Eastern religion. There's an awful lot. So Buddhists, for example, if you talk to Buddhists, they're agnostic on whether there's a God or not. But if there is a God, it's not like our God. There's some kind of force, Brahmanism or something like that. It sort of understands everything is sort of emanating from this unifying force. Okay, that's another way of conceiving of reality. Okay, that's different. You and I look at the universe and we see things that God has created and God is maintaining, and we understand God is the reason why they're all here. Pantheists see God in everything. That can have some important effects. Okay, the next one is deism. Deism actually doesn't belong there. It's not worthy of it. Deism is just it's a poor man's atheism is what it is. Deism basically says that, yeah, God exists, but he doesn't count for anything in this world. He just explains where everything came from. That's it. The purpose of God in deism is he's the original unmoved mover. He got everything going. However, as a practical matter, this God is not involved in our lives, and we don't really have any duties with respect to this God other than what he has written into nature. Hate to tell you, but a number of our founding fathers, most particularly Thomas Jefferson, was a big-time deist. Deism is not a very viable religion or reality. It's just what it is. It's people who can't get rid of God completely. They can't take what that means, but they effectively get rid of him. All right, so deism, we're not going to worry about that. What about paganism? What does paganism mean? And I'm using this. Of course, Christians would use this as a very
disparaging.
Yeah, it's very disparaging. But what do we really mean? Paganism, the idea of paganism is there is this metaphysical reality, this spirit world out there, but there's not necessarily any God. There may be many gods, okay? And so there's lots of gods, there's spirits, there's demons, there's all this stuff out there. The stuff of magic and witchcraft is all about that sort of thing. Druids, all the ancient religions with all the different gods doing all their different things. But there's no understanding of a single God that is universally in control and universally responsible to which we owe duties. In fact, in the ancient world, you oftentimes would put in the crosshairs between your duty to this God and your duty to that God. But there was no, you can say, well, Zeus. No, Zeus was just the biggest among all of them. There was no Paganism is not theism. Theism means there is one all-powerful, omniscient, good God and personal. Okay? Now, the last one is what is called, in once again, very fancy words, metaphysical naturalism. Let me explain to you a closely related idea, and that is what's called methodological naturalism. Naturalism is talking about nature. What is in nature? Matter and energy. Methodological naturalism means that when we go about our work exploring the universe, when we are taking observations, when we are doing experiments, when we are trying to figure out the boiling point of water or why, or the relationship between the boiling point of water and atmospheric pressure, when we're trying to do that, we are going to make a practical assumption. The practical assumption is God is not going to meddle in the results. That's a practical assumption, okay? I might boil water at sea level, and today God thinks it'd just be fun for the water to boil at, 110 degrees, okay? If he wants to, can it? Yes. Yes. He can also cause a picture of the Virgin Mary to appear in the boiling water as I'm boiling it. He can do that too. And if he does, I will be stunned. But as a methodological naturalist, I'm going to throw out that data, okay? Because God is playing with me today, and I'm happy for that. And I say, hi, God, and that's wonderful, but I'm trying to explore how your universe works, and I'm going to assume that the data I get back is not the result of some miraculous interference, but that this is how things work. Now, that is a practical assumption. By the way, when 1,200 years ago, very brilliant people who were deeply religious, deeply spiritual, set about to build beautiful cathedrals out of giant stones with huge domes, amazing works of architecture and engineering, okay? They were methodological naturalists. They didn't say, let's pile up these stones in a great big dome. Let's pray that it works. Okay, and if our prayers work, it'll hold up. That's not what they did. Nor did they design what they believed to be a dome which will hold up because the forces are all properly balanced and spread and so on. And we're going to pray, otherwise it's all going to fall down. They assume that if they build it right, it will hold up to the glory of God. So, yeah, you pray to God, but you also assume that God is, going to make stones do what stones always do here when we build our cathedral, even though we're building it for the Lord. So that's methodological naturalism. That is a practical thing that we all do all the time, and it just means that we're going to count on the data we're getting back as not being a fluke. It could be. God can cause my water to boil at an unusual place because it just was amusing to him, and that's fine. But if I assume that in every bit of data I get, God is monkeying with it, what then am I going to learn about this world? And the answer is nothing. So I'm going to assume that most of the time God is not doing that, and therefore I can rely upon whatever I get here is going to work over there. And if it doesn't, there's some other natural principle. Right? That is methodological naturalism. There's nothing wrong with that. Here's another name for that. It's called the scientific method. Okay? It just means that we are going to assume that what we're measuring here is the properties here, and that God is not doing a miracle in front of us. He can do a miracle. It's not a denial of miracles. It's just saying we're going to assume that our data resulted. Now, metaphysical naturalism takes it a huge step further. I could say just a step further, but it's not a step further. It's a huge step further. Metaphysical naturalism asserts that there is no God. We are assuming that there is no monkeying of God in our experiments. That's methodological naturalism. The leap is there is no God. There is no God to monkey with it. Therefore, anything and everything we look at is always and only and absolutely only the result of natural forces. It doesn't matter whether we're boiling a pot of water or trying to explore the origins of the universe and trying to look at distant galaxies. It doesn't matter what we're doing. We are going to assume that there are only natural forces involved because that is all there is. Okay? That is metaphysical naturalism. Metaphysical naturalism is not practical, and it is not scientific. It is thoroughly philosophical. It is every bit as philosophical and every bit as religious as the theist that says there's a God and he created everything, or the pantheist that says everything is an emanation from God, or here's this other person who says, well, no, there's lots of gods out there, there's no one God, or here's this guy who says, no, there's no God at all. There's no experiment that shows this. There's no logic that proves this. There's nothing anywhere that comes up with this other than it is a way of looking at reality. Do you understand that? This is a reality. It is a reality with profound implications. Let me tell you right now, if you don't already know it, you're going to know it eventually. The culture wars or the religious disputes that we're having in our nation, they are not between Christians and Muslims. Two different theistic groups who have a different idea of what God is saying. Could be. If there's a lot of Muslims here, we might, but we don't. We are not arguing with pantheists. There's just not very many pantheists around, and they don't care, okay? We're not having an argument with pagans. There's pagans running around, but there's just not enough of them. The arguments, the difficulties, the challenges, and the paradigm shift in our nation is between theists, specifically Christian theists, and metaphysical naturalists. That is where all the mischief in our society, in Western society generally, is coming from. Okay? And as we go through and start exploring particular issues, you're going to see this clearly. We're not arguing with a Buddhist or a Hindu here. This isn't that sort of a thing. But there is something profoundly religious and deeply different between the two sides that is different in reality. Now let me talk very briefly, because we don't have a lot of time here, very briefly let's talk about some implications. Metaphysical naturalism says matter and energy is all there is. Okay? Now, when you're doing experiments, we assume that that's all we're going to get back. So that's fine. For practical purposes, I can assume that but when we say that's all there is no miracles, there is no God, there is nothing out there, we are saying a couple of other things too that are really important. Number one is there is no objective meaning or purpose at all. What do I mean by that? I mean that there is no God, there is no overarching purpose or direction that the universe is taking. Things are what they are. Okay?
And we have no duty.
And there's no guiding of any divine hand. There's no divine origin. There's nothing like that. Now, people can't live this way. I'm just telling you right now, they can't. You cannot get up in the morning and say nothing matters. It doesn't matter. Whether I live or die, it doesn't matter. Human beings cannot thrive that way. By the way, fleas can. Okay? Cockroaches can. Squirrels can. Dogs can. People can't. Now, because people cannot believe that nothing matters, that nothing means anything, they're going to wrestle with the implications of this. One way of answering it, one way that people come out, is what's called nihilism. Nihilism is just honestly saying, you're right, nothing matters. You're right. Doesn't matter. Everything is meaningless. We all end up in the grave. All of our graves will end up scattered as dust in the cosmic universe when it all cools down eventually, and the difference between me and a rock on Mars is zero. I am nothing more than the elements in my body, and everything else is an illusion. Well, if you really buy into that and decide that that's true, you're a nihilist. If you're a nihilist, you're probably not long for this world. If you go on living, you won't be happy. Not very many people are nihilists. Existentialism is a way, and this is a broad term, by the way, but existentialism is a way to try to gain some meaning in light of what we just said about there being no meaning. Okay?
You can be happy.
So here's the thing. Metaphysical naturalism says there is no objective meaning, which means there's no meaning that's the same for you and me and all. Existentialists say, you're right, there's no meaning, there's objective meaning. There is, however, subjective meaning, subjective purpose. There's your life and your experiences. Here's my life and my experiences. These things are real and they are meaningful to me. And they are real and meaningful to you. And each of us has and must create our own realities and purposes and meanings. Why must we create our own? Why must we create our own purpose and meaning?
Because there's nothing objective.
Because human beings have to have a purpose and meaning, and there isn't anywhere else to go get one. So if you try to impose your purpose and meaning on me, okay, either you're just being a bully, or you're trying to say that your purpose and meaning is somehow or another objectively true. It's true for everybody. But I know it's not. I'm an existentialist. There is no purpose and meaning for everybody. You have your meaning, I have mine. You have your reality, I have mine. That's existentialism. Postmodernism is kind of taking that another step and saying all of history and everything, not everything is just the experiences of the people that have it. There is no objective purpose and meaning or direction in history. There is no right narrative to anything.
Always win.
Now, one last thing and then I got to quit. Morally speaking, we end up with this problem. If you think about moral thinking for a theist, for a Christian, we assert that there is a what should be. And then we look around at the world and we see what is. And the difference between what should be and what is a moral problem. Okay? You and I are not what we should be. If we were, we would be right. We would be righteous. We would be good. We would be the way we're supposed to be. All right? So, tornadoes are not the way things should be. Okay? The way it should be is there should be no tornadoes and children should not die. In this world, bad things happen. It's not the way it should be. Therefore, we say it's bad. If it were good, it would look like this. What should be. But metaphysical naturalism says there is no what should be. There is only what is. Now, when you think about that for a little bit, you'll realize that there's no good or bad. There's just what is. Folks, that's hard to swallow. But that's one of the reasons why you have such an exaltation of what is, quote, natural. That's what is. That's why some people are very impressed with the argument that, 10% of the people are homosexual. I mean, I don't care if it's 10% or 2%. What difference does that make? I don't care if you say it's 90%. 90%, 100% of people are desperately sinful. They are still wrong. So, but the argument like that matters? Like, no other animals are monogamous. Well, what you're trying to say is, is that monogamy is not natural. And therefore, we are being unnatural, and being unnatural is bad because the only thing that really is true and good is what is. All right. And then you end up with a total moral relativism. Okay? There's what you think, but that's born of your experience. There's what I think, it's born of my experience, but your experience is just for you, my experience is just for me, and therefore everything, what we call right or wrong, is entirely contextualized in terms of the particular individuals and so on. All right. I'm not going to do any more with this today, but we will talk next week about specific issues and how you will see just absolutely clearly the two sides and where they're coming from and why the gap is not an argument over rules or even an argument over rights, as is often put that way. I have a right. It's an argument over reality. What is real? And that's what's making for all the mischief. All right, let's pray. Lord Jesus, we thank you for your word, which tells us what is real. We thank you, Lord, that for us, you are real, that everything comes from you and everything goes back to you, and we understand, O Lord, ourselves as your own creatures loved by you and not our own realities. You are the reality. Help us, Lord, to understand that in this world we fight on many levels, and one of the levels that we fight is in the levels of the spiritual, and it is not always what it looks like. Help us to be wise, help us to be shrewd, help us to understand the difference between right and wrong, good and bad, what is real and what is not. Amen.